Ms. Gutierrez was hired to perform a dual role on the movie. She was hired to be both an armorer and a props assistant. As a props assistant, it was Ms. Gutierrez's primary duty to essentially go out and source and bring back to the film set everything that the actors need to touch as part of making the movie. So for example, if they're doing a kitchen scene, then Ms. Gutierrez would have gone out, purchased plates, cups, glasses, forks, all of that sort of stuff, and then those would have been incorporated into the set. Ms. Gutierrez's other role was as the movie's armorer, and it's that role that really has brought us here today. The armorer has a few key responsibilities. The first responsibility is to source and bring to the set all of the firearms that are going to be used as part of the movie. So for a modern movie, that may have required her to purchase or obtain machine guns, semi-automatic handguns, long rifles, and that sort of thing. But for a Western like Rust, the armorer would have to source weapons that were in use at the time so that the movie looks more authentic. And so that would include finding old-looking revolvers and shotguns and things of that nature. I've just put up a photo. This is the firearm that Mr. Baldwin was using in this movie. This is also the firearm that was used in the incident that resulted in the death of Ms. Hutchins. One of the things that I think it's important for you all to understand is that throughout this trial, we all may refer to these type of firearms as prop guns, but make no mistake, they are legitimate firearms. If you put a live bullet inside of these guns, they will fire. So we sometimes refer to them as prop weapons, but they are absolutely capable of causing a projectile to fly out of the barrel. The other thing that it's important for you all to know is that although this particular weapon looks old, it is actually a brand new gun. This gun was purchased directly from the manufacturer for the purpose of being used in this movie. And although it looks old, it's not a gun that has had hundreds or thousands of rounds put through it. It was a brand new and perfectly functioning gun when it arrived on the set. The second thing that the armorer is responsible for is sourcing and purchasing blank and dummy ammunition. You're going to be hearing a lot throughout this trial about the differences between live ammunition, blank ammunition, dummy ammunition. So I'm just going to kind of give you a 10,000-foot overview of what this stuff is. The image that's on your screen right now is what's called a blank round. A blank round is actually pretty easy to distinguish because it has that crimped end where normally a bullet would be. The reason that blanks are used in the movie is because when it's in the gun and an actor pulls a trigger, there is enough gunpowder inside of that blank to cause a pop and have a cloud of smoke come out from the gun, but it doesn't have a projectile that shoots through the barrel of the gun. So these are a type of round that is used frequently on the movie sets, especially whenever they want to make it look like the actor is actually firing a weapon. The second type of round that is used on the sets are what's called dummy rounds. And these are a different story. Dummies look exactly like real bullets. As you can tell from kind of that main image there, although this evidence dummy round has some writing on it, you wouldn't be able to distinguish that from a live bullet if you were just looking at it with your eyes. And because these dummy rounds are designed to look exactly like live ammunition, every round has to be thoroughly checked before it is put inside of one of these firearms. Aside from sourcing firearms, blanks, and dummies for the movie, the next major function that Hannah was required to do on the movie set is that she was required to check every single one of these rounds to make sure that it's the appropriate blank or dummy and not live ammunition before it gets inserted into the gun. And there are two primary ways that an armorer or anybody who's familiar with this can check to make sure that a round is a dummy round. The first thing they can do is shake it, and if you'll see in that on the lower right hand side, I've got a photograph for you there of a plastic container that's got 3 BBs in it. Those BBs are inside of that dummy round, so that whenever you shake it, you can audibly hear that it's making a noise, and that way you know it's a dummy round. Sometimes they have a little spring in there rather than these bullets, but they always have some sort of noisemaker in there. The other way to distinguish a dummy from a real live bullet is in that top right photograph, and you'll see that that cartridge has a hole drilled into the side of the casing. That's the second way that you can distinguish a dummy round from a live round. And then we have, not to overcomplicate things, but I think it's important that you know this, we also have some dummy rounds that are missing what's called the primer. Normally on a live cartridge, there's an explosive element that is inside of that center portion that whenever the hammer of the gun hits that primer, it causes a small spark that then ignites the rest of the gunpowder in the bullet and causes the projectile to be expelled. So dummy rounds, as you can see, they do look an awful lot like live ammunition, but there are ways, if you are careful, that you can distinguish a dummy round from a live round. The next major function of the armorer is to check the firearm before it is brought onto the set. And there's a very specific process that is used for this. When it's time for a firearm to be used, the armorer is required to present the firearm to the first assistant director to double check that only dummy rounds are inside the gun. And the armorer is also supposed to offer the actor who is receiving the gun the opportunity to also have the gun inspected in front of them. Unfortunately, in this case, Ms. Gutierrez did not always adhere to these safety procedures, and you're going to hear from several witnesses who will testify that she often rushed through this critical step and sometimes she skipped this check altogether.
Them call for a life flight, so they were trying to stabilize her to get her in a helicopter and get her to whatever ER they felt was appropriate.
And at some point in time, were you notified that Ms. Hutchins had passed?
Yes.
Mr. Adiego, when you heard the gunshot and you saw these people fall, did it occur to you in that moment that it was a live round, that there was a real bullet in that gun?
Maybe not in that moment. I think it became clear when, like I mentioned, I rolled Joel over, helped roll Joel over to see what very much looked like a large caliber bullet just being barely held in by his skin.
With regard to safety bulletins, was there a difference between the way that safety bulletins were handled on the set of Rust and the way that safety bulletins were handled on the other films you participated in that had firearms and armorers?
Yes.
Tell us the difference.
So in those emails that I referred to earlier, it typically would say, please, would ask us to please refer to the appropriate safety bulletins, and then they would list the number of that bulletin. And then in that email, I'd be able to click on a link, if I so chose, to review that bulletin. I don't recall any of those bulletins actually being attached to our emails during Rust.
You don't recall ever getting a single one?
I don't recall ever receiving a safety bulletin from Rust Productions, no.
Let's jump to safety meetings. On the other sets that you worked on that had guns and armorers, how frequently would a safety meeting occur?
At least once a day, if not more frequently.
And on the set of Rust, how frequently did safety meetings occur?
I don't know that I was invited to more than one during our couple of weeks on Rust.
So for the entire 2 weeks, you are only aware of one safety meeting?
That's my recollection, yes.
Okay, so we've talked about safety bulletins and safety meetings. Go ahead and continue to walk us through, in your experience, the protocol of an armor with firearms.
In my experience, the armors are usually the, for lack of a better description, the most uptight and anal retentive people on set, because they literally have people's lives in their hands. They don't joke around. They don't really have friendly conversations. They stick to themselves and focus on the task at hand. Most of them, in my experience, seem to be either former military or law enforcement and have some sort of background with firearms.
Did you notice a difference then generally in terms of just the behavior, the general behavior on the movie set of the other armors you worked with as compared to Ms. Gutierrez?
Yes.
What was that?
She wasn't necessarily as serious or professional as I'm accustomed to with the other armors that I've worked with.
What do you mean? Give us an example.
I recall walking by her cart a number of times, and firearms and or bandoliers or ammo belts being left out on the cart unsecured. I don't know that I've ever seen an armor pull loose ammo out of a fanny pack. Typically, my experience with armors is any ammo they use, blanks or dummies, comes out of some sort of container, whether it's a labeled box or some other plastic type ammo container. So,
what is your understanding, based on your experience, of the armorer's responsibilities on a movie set?
To control and keep safe all firearms and ammunition on a given set.
Okay. Go ahead and walk us through, if you will, what in your experience are the safety checks that take place when an armorer is bringing a firearm onto the set for filming.
Typically, the first AD, the first assistant director, would notify us that we're going to use firearms for a scene, whether they're loaded or not. They would say something about the fact that we're bringing something that's maybe not a rubber dummy, but an actual firearm onto set. And then typically the armorer would invite the first AD, the cast members involved, and any crew that would like to see both the firearm and the ammunition to see those safety checks. Whether that's looking through the barrel, shaking those rounds we discussed, the dummy rounds, to hear that BB, or explaining to us that the actor is going to fire X number of blanks and they're going to be of a certain power, and then making sure that anybody that's going to be in close proximity has the appropriate safety equipment they need, and they're prepared for that moment on camera.
So what you just described regarding the armorer showing the gun and allowing people to look down the barrel, why would that be important to crew members?
Because unfortunately there have been accidents in the past where the barrels weren't cleaned in firearms and a blank was fired and whatever debris was in that barrel injured or killed somebody on set.
So with regard to your experiences with Ms. Gutierrez, were the cast and crew ever invited to look down the barrel?
Not to my recollection.
And was that concerning to you?
It was.
Why?
Well, they call them safety checks for a reason, and we were moving through those instead of pausing to have those checks.
So the gun is generally, in your previous experience, loaded with either the dummies or the blanks right there in front of cast and crew?
Correct.
Is that a practice that Ms. Gutierrez followed?
Not to my recollection.
Do you recall ever watching her or taking note of her loading the gun in the presence of cast or crew?
I think there were a couple of times on set where we were doing these quick resets instead of cutting the camera, where she was put in a position to reload that as quickly as she could and hand it back to our actors.
Do you recall being present on the set of Rust on a day where there were what I'm going to refer to as accidental discharges of guns?
Yes.
Can you describe the first accidental discharge that you recall happening?
I think the first one was I don't know if the prop master was loading or unloading.
And let me stop you. What's the prop master's name?
Sarah, I think her name was Sarah Zachary.
Okay.
Was her name. We were outside of the character Rust's cabin, and I don't know if she was loading or unloading a handgun, but unannounced to any of the crew, that firearm discharged. So we consider that a negligent discharge.
And how did you know it discharged?
I was within feet of it, and she seemed pretty spooked when I turned around, and it appeared as though she had shot that firearm at her foot.
Can you tell us, in your experience, in your opinion, what you think that gun was loaded with?
It made a bang, but it didn't, I don't know if there was a bullet or not, because I don't know if it hit her foot, but it certainly made a loud noise that spooked us and the animals we had on set. I think we had a couple of horses on set, and again, it was unannounced, so it was a surprise to everybody that was around. And then he drew it again, and it went off. And instantly, I mean, a firearm went off in a small wooden church. So the concussion, ears ringing, that moment of panic in everybody. I think the first person I made eye contact with was Halyna, who was clearly injured by whatever that gunshot was, that noise we had just heard. And in fact, she was starting to go flush, and I think holding her right side, and then I think that Joel let out some sort of scream or made some noise that, to indicate he was also injured.
An ammunition box of marked as 3840 dummies that was removed from the prop truck.
And are all of the rounds in that styrofoam insert 3840 dummies?
No.
What other calibers in there?
Some of them are 4440s.
All right. Any 45 Colt rounds in there?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. States Exhibit 51. What are we looking at here?
This is a close-up of those same rounds.
Okay, and we can kind of see the head stamp there. Can you see that?
Yes.
States Exhibit 52. What's this?
These are those same rounds laid out.
And the rounds over on the right-hand side, what are those?
The rounds that are over on that side that are laid sideways, those are the 3840 rounds.
These are the 3840s?
I apologize. Let me refer to my report.
Sure.
No, I'm sorry. Those are the 4440s.
And the chrome and shiny brass that we're looking at here on the left, what caliber are those?
Those are the 3840s.
Okay, great. In terms of the 4440s here on the right, do all of the 4440s that you have, dummy rounds that you have in evidence, do they all have that same projectile that we can see here?
Yes.
And is that projectile dissimilar than the projectile of the live rounds?
Yes.
States Exhibit 53. What's this?
These are the rounds that were provided to Detective Hancock from Hannah Gutierrez during her interview.
Okay. And were they all dummy rounds?
Yes.
And the 5 on the left, do they shake?
No.
The one on the right, does it rattle?
Yes.
Rattle rather than shake, I apologize. States Exhibit 54, what are we looking at here?
This is the close-up of the projectile that was recovered from Joel Souza's shoulder.
Okay. And just to be clear, this is the only projectile that was that was taken into evidence presumably from the injuries of the victims.
Correct.
Okay. States Exhibit 55. What's this?
This was a bag of spent casings that was located inside the Mary Kay bag.
At any point in time, did you express concerns to Ms. Gutierrez that she was leaving firearms unattended?
I did, in an email, and then in person.
Did you suggest to Ms. Gutierrez a way of remedying the problem of leaving firearms unattended?
Yes.
What did you suggest?
Some type of logging system, check in, check out.
And did she respond to you?
She did respond via email.
And did she agree to a check-in, check-out log system?
No.
Why not, if she told you?
She said that it was too complicated to do in between scenes. And they had a system that they were working with, and I'm trying to recollect, that was end of day, I believe.
Okay. Did you then have an in-person meeting with Ms. Gutierrez?
Yes.
And who was present at that meeting?
Myself, Brian Norvell, who was the production designer, Hannah, and I believe Roe was there for part of it, the UPM, and then she stepped away to handle something else.
And why would Mr. Norvell be there?
Because as production designer, he's over everything that is the look of the film, and that includes armor.
And did Ms. Gutierrez express concerns about being torn between armorer duties and prop assistant duties?
Can you rephrase?
At any point in time, did Ms. Gutierrez indicate to you that she did not have enough time to focus on her armorer duties because she was busy doing props?
No. The reverse would be true. So she focused more on her armorer duties and less on her props duties.
And did that create an issue for you? Let me ask you, did you ask Ms. Gutierrez to spend less time on armorer duties and more time supporting props?
On props days, yes.
And when you say props days, what do you mean?
Meaning where she was not acting as armor. They were not the armor days that we just referenced.
And in the meeting that you had with Ms. Gutierrez, did you offer her additional support so that she could accomplish her tasks for both jobs?
Yes.
What additional support did you offer?
It was a collaboration of offers between production and the art department.
So my question is, what support was being offered to her?
Admin support, organizational, all the paperwork, to try to take as much off of her plate as possible so that she could really focus on the set duties.
Ms. Gutierrez indicated to you that she brought 2 boxes of dummies onto the set, correct?
Correct.
How many boxes of dummies from Ms. Gutierrez do you have in evidence?
We found 1.
Do you know what happened to the other one?
No.
And for completeness, did you ever find any evidence that Ms. Gutierrez was engaging in any kind of target practice or plinking, anything like that?
No.
Did you ever find any evidence that Mr. Kenny was the source of the live rounds on set?
No.
Did you ever discover any evidence that Sarah Zachary was the source of the live rounds on set?
No.
Did you ever discover any evidence that Hannah Gutierrez was the person who brought the live rounds on set?
I guess it'd be circumstantial.
What circumstantial evidence are you referring to?
So in her interview, I mean, there's a lot of things. So, that box she identified in her interview, and I asked her to show me what a box of hers would look like. She identified one on her phone. That picture on her phone matched exactly that box that we had. She was the one that handed that box to Lieutenant Benavides, stating that that was the box that she was pulling from, along with, the various bandoliers that we collected with that live ammunition. She identified as bringing from her previous set that she worked on. and the other box of dummies, it didn't match the box that she had brought. It was identified as one brought by Seth Kenny. The rounds inside that box did not, even just the dummies themselves didn't match in the way they looked. So all of this in totality is what we used in our investigation.
Did you ever discover any evidence as to who loaded the live round in the gun?
In Hannah's interview, she told me that she was the one that loaded Alec's gun.
Corporal, what are you showing her now, just so that we can follow along?
So the one picture is just a bunch of casings, but what I'm trying to show her is the different head stamps and how you could essentially tell the difference in the manufacturers on the head stamps.
And what are you comparing? Starline brass and...
Just any of the other ones that we had found.
And are you showing photos of dummy rounds with different head stamps?
I believe the dummy rounds, and then also that last picture that I was showing her were just the casings themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So you can tell because it has a little star, an arc, and then a star.
Yeah.
So all these have different manufacturers. That's how you can tell where these come from.
Okay.
Some of them have nothing.
Yeah, I've
Some
seen
of them,
like I said, they all kind of vary a little bit.
right.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, the star, arc and the star, yeah.
Okay.
And that's the one that was discharged.
Yeah.
So here's my thing with this company is this company doesn't produce live ammo.
So what the fuck? That's insane.
What's happening there? Do you see this over on the right here?
So keep in mind, as I said previously, you will see a camera crew operating, and he's doing what's called a handheld right there. He's hand holding the camera and moving it, meaning it's not on a dolly or a track or anything of that nature. So that camera operator's hand holding that piece of equipment with operators behind him. Remember that the frame that you're seeing here has that exact same situation going on as well behind this. So it's a number of people out here, both behind that camera and behind the one that we're seeing POV from, okay? And that appears to be a full flash blank just from the report, the amount of powder that's leaving the barrel, the amount of report and gun smoke that's coming out. I would imagine that's a full flash blank. And one of the first rounds that he fired actually incapacitated the camera and operator in the smoke, meaning he was entirely too close to that camera to fire that. We have a minimum amount of distance that is required for safety when you're firing blanks, depending on what type of blank you're firing, and that was well within the safety zone.
And are you familiar with accidental discharges?
There's two types of discharges that are in the firearms world, training world, etc. You have NDs and ADs. ADs are accidental discharges. Now, an accidental discharge happens very infrequently because that means there was a malfunction of the weapon or something that created a true accident. Almost all discharges that occur are negligent discharges or NDs, which means it's operator error. So an ND would be the correct verbiage there.
And are you aware, based on the review of the documents and the materials in this case, are you aware that there were, I think what you're referring to as negligent discharges?
Yes.
Okay. And are you also aware that with regard to those negligent discharges, Ms. Gutierrez was not in control of those weapons at the moment?
It is my understanding, yes.
Okay. So, if there's a negligent discharge on a movie set, ultimately, who's responsible for that?
It would be the armorer's responsibility. Now, obviously, that blame also can be split with whoever created the negligent discharge, but if you create an environment for the ND to occur, then the blame is on the armorer and on the person who actually had the negligent discharge. So it's a double-sided coin there.
Okay. In your experience, does a movie set armorer generally keep their blanks and dummies locked up?
They should, yes.
Why?
To avoid any disturbance of them, anyone. Again, it's just like chain of custody in court or the law enforcement world or any world where you have evidence moving from point A to point B. You need to have one person in control of it. More hands on it or incorrect hands on it can open up the door for accidents and things to go wrong.
So, at what point in time do you have contact with Ms. Gutierrez?
When Mr. Baldwin was called to set, when he arrived on the set.
Who called Mr. Baldwin to set?
I did.
Did you, at the same time, make any request for the armorer or armorer services?
I did not.
Did you ask for the gun?
I did not ask for the gun.
And why wouldn't you have asked for the gun?
Because it's normal procedure on certainly all of the productions that I've worked on with firearms. And it's not just for firearms, it's for props and wardrobe, that when first team is called to set, it's announced over a walkie-talkie. The first assistant director would go on to the walkie-talkie and say, "Camera is ready, first team, please." This alerts all the different departments, certainly costumes, because they're going to need to do whatever, put a piece of costume on the actor, make adjustments. Hair and makeup, they're going to need to do their touches. Props, they're going to need to give the prop that's needed to the actor. And this is also a signal, a cue to the armorer that the actor that needs the firearm is going to be on set, and I should be there. The armorer. The armorer, I should be there to give the gun to the actor.
Okay, so you didn't actually call for the gun, but you agree that Ms. Gutierrez may have understood that it would be time for her to come into the church.
Yes. Left the church. I went to Ms. Gutierrez's cart, which is on, if you're facing the church, it would be on the left-hand side of the church, right just immediately around the corner. I took it to her and I said, "I need you to unload that gun. I need to know what it's in it."
And did she unload the gun in front of you?
She did.
And what was taken out of the gun?
I recall seeing 5 dummy rounds, again with the distinctive bright brass ends to them, and 1 shell casing that did not have a projectile on it, and it had a completely distinctive looking end to it.
When you say a distinctive looking end to it, what are you referring to?
I recall it as being gray, metallic gray. And I recall that it was just completely different looking. It's hard to explain. There was some kind of machining or something. Maybe it was raised. This is my recollection, but a more contemporary looking bullet than what I was seeing in the other rounds.
When we talk about how the armorer and the assistant director are you familiar with the way that the armorer and the assistant director are supposed to do a safety check of guns?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I have a pretty good understanding of it.
Okay. And what is your understanding of whether or not the armorer should load the gun in the presence of the assistant director?
Ooh, to be honest, that I don't really know.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's supposed to come to that moment loaded or if they're supposed to do it in that exact moment. That I'm not certain.
Let me ask you this. Did you ever see Ms. Gutierrez load a gun with dummy rounds in the presence of the actor or the assistant director?
I mean, gosh, nothing that really sticks out to me. I remember times when she would call out what was in it, but I don't remember really seeing her specifically putting things in.
Okay.
And there was an incredibly loud bang that was not like the half and quarter loads you hear on a set. Those are they're loud poofs and pops. This was deafening. And it felt like somebody had taken a baseball bat to my shoulder. I remember that distinctly, and sort of stumbling back and shouting. I don't remember exactly what I said.
Were you able to see Ms. Hutchins at that time?
I did. I remember sort of stumbling back, and I either fell to my knees or I was sitting, and I distinctly remember her being lowered to the ground. People had her sort of by either side, and I still didn't quite know what had happened. Nothing made sense. I remember initially thinking, had she been startled by it, and they were sitting her down as a result, and then I saw the blood on her back.
And to the best of your recollection, what happened after that?
It got very chaotic. I remember them laying me down. I remember them laying her down next to me. Although we were sort of facing in opposite directions, my head was this way, her head was that way. I remember a lot of panic. I still just couldn't figure out what had happened. I thought, was there something that had been stuck in the barrel that came out? But just nothing made sense. I remember our dolly grip, Ross, coming to sort of grab me and trying to call me, and then Matt Hemmer came in, and between the two of them, I remember they sort of tended to me and were pulling up and just trying to find out where there was a hole.
Do you recall, Mr. Souza, at any point in time during that general time after the gun went off, having any kind of an interaction with Ms. Gutierrez?
I remember at one point looking up and her standing there with another person or a few other people, and she looked distraught. And I remember her saying, I'm sorry, Joel," and I remember somebody just screaming at her, and they just ushered her out.
Okay. At some point in time, were you taken from the scene?
Yeah, it's funny. When I hear later about how long we laid there, it felt like 5 minutes. And I remember looking over and her looking back at me. And she's had the biggest brown eyes I've ever seen. And then, but I don't remember who they took out first. They put me on some kind of stretcher and rolled me out.
And where did they take you?
They told me they were going to take me to they just said they were going to take me to the hospital, and I kept begging them to take me where she was, but they said they couldn't and that they would later. And they eventually took me to, I think it's Christus St. Vincent, I think that's what it's called, in Santa Fe.
And when you were at the hospital, did you have an understanding that you had been actually shot by a bullet?
No. I mean, I knew something got me, but they kept talking about this bullet, and it could not compute for me. I just kept saying, you don't understand. No, this was a movie set. That's not possible. You don't get it. And they kept saying, no, it is. And I just keep insisting, you don't understand, because this is not possible. It's just not possible that there's a live round. It just can't. And then they eventually maybe grew tired of my protesting about it, because they showed me the x-ray of my back, and there was a very large bullet in it.
Did you see them?
Yes.
And when they arrived on set, were they empty, or did they have to be loaded with dummies?
They only had to have a couple at most put in them, because they were lost, fell out. That's about it.
Okay. But the gun belts that Ms. Gutierrez provided were already loaded with dummies when she brought them on set. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding, yes.
And that's your recollection?
Yes.
And you saw them?
Yes.
So when she brought them on set and they were already loaded with dummies, did you take the time to remove every dummy and shake them?
No.
Did you see her take the time to remove every dummy from the belts and shake them?
No.
Did you see anyone?
No.
Because you guys had another assistant for a little while, Ms. Montoya, is that right?
Correct.
And did Ms. Montoya, you never saw her do that with those?
That wasn't her job, no.
Okay. During the time that you worked with Ms. Gutierrez, did you find her to be easy to work with?
No.
During the time that you worked with Ms. Gutierrez as her supervisor in props, did she call you a cunt?
Yes.
Was it around that time that you decided you might want to fire her?
No, it was just overall. But
what else about working with Ms. Gutierrez was difficult other than her referring to you as a cunt?
Mainly, I just felt like her work ethic wasn't the greatest. She wasn't always willing to help in a year or two. She was usually wanting to be in the truck to clean guns for the day. And yeah.
Did Ms. Gutierrez ever show up to set late?
One day, yes.
Did she give you a reason for that?
She had a migraine.
She told you she had a migraine?
Correct.
But she was able to show up and work at some point that day, right?
Yes.
So apparently the migraine didn't last all day?
No.
After the incident, did you have contact with Ms. Gutierrez when she was sitting in the back of Mr. Benavidez's police car?
I believe so, yes.
And why were you having contact with her?
I was just checking on her to see if she was okay.
And did you ask her if she was okay?
Yes.
And what was her response?
I don't recall.
Did she express concerns to you about how this might affect her career?
No. Yeah.
Object.
And did you stay with Ms. Gutierrez for a little while?
Yes, ma'am.
And then at some point, did you leave?
Yes.
Did anything unusual happen when you left Ms. Gutierrez's room?
Yes. She asked me if I could hold on to something for her. I said yes. She put it in my hand, and I walked out as there was a knock on the door.
And after you left the room, did you look to see what she had placed in your hand?
Yes.
And can you describe, without making any assumptions about what it was, can you just describe what you saw in your hand?
Yes. It was a clear Ziploc baggie with a green small Ziploc baggie inside, and there was powder inside the green baggie.
What color was the powder?
White.
If I want you to compare this to like a sugar packet that you
It
would.
was definitely not sugar.
No. I'm sorry. Let me get my
look like sugar.
Let me get my question out.
Okay.
I want to have a discussion about how much was in the green part, and I want you to compare it to a sugar packet that you would open and put in coffee or tea.
Okay.
How many of those do you think it was?
Maybe 4 or 5.
Okay. And Ms. Smith, how old are you?
I'm 51.
And when you were a younger person, did you have an opportunity to use the drug cocaine?
Yes, ma'am. I'm a recovering addict.
Are you familiar with what cocaine looks like?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with the way that cocaine is packaged?
Yes, ma'am.
Based on that experience, what did you believe to be in the bag?
I believed it to be cocaine.
And what did you do with it?
I threw it in the hallway trash can before even going downstairs to my hotel room.
And why did you throw it in the hallway trash can?
Because, like I said, I am a recovering addict. I can't, first and foremost, have it in my possession. And second, I was really very offended, and I didn't want anything to do with the situation anymore.
Okay. After October 21st passes, did you receive any text message communications from Ms. Gutierrez?
Yes. Several.
And generally speaking, what was the theme of those messages?
I want my stuff back.
Other than the bag containing the green bag containing the white powder, other than that item, did you have anything else that belonged to Ms. Gutierrez?
No, ma'am.
You didn't want to work with Ms. Gutierrez in the future, is that correct? Do you recall making that statement?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Why didn't you want to work with her in the future?
Well, the issue of loading a full load blank with a horse in the vicinity is a huge violation of an armorer's work.
So why don't you explain to the jury what you're talking about, because I don't think that we've addressed that issue yet. Was there an issue that came to your attention with regard to the set animals and a full load blank?
There was several days prior, and I don't know exactly when it happened. Sarah Zachary called to discuss a number of things, including her concern.
And I'm gonna stop you right there.
Oh,
I got it.
Yep.
So, did you receive information that there was an issue with a full load blank and an animal?
Yes.
Okay, stop there. Generally speaking, explain to the jury what types of blanks are to be used around animals, what types are not, and why, having nothing to do with what happened on Rust.
In general, we have several iterations of blank loads, and the idea is that we always want to use the least amount of noise and gunpowder for the effect necessary. And so if ultimately we could get away with using nothing but a prime case, that would be ideal.
On the set of Rust, different than what you were used to.
Yes.
Can you describe to the jury what you noticed, how you thought it was different.
I noticed the armorer on Rust did not secure the weapons as a normal armorer would, or an armorer on productions I've worked on before would. Normally, the weapon would be secured until it was time for the actor or stunt actor to need it. And then the armorer would go to their, generally a locked cabinet, grab the weapon, take it to the actor or stunt actor. With the first AD, sometimes the stunt coordinator, depending on who's there, open the weapon, empty it. If it needs to be emptied, show the actor or stunt actor the type of bullet, I guess you would call it, that's going to be in the gun. Show it that it's not real, and then, or essentially check it in front of the actor and the first AD to make sure that everyone's comfortable with it. And then hand it over to that performer for the shot, for whatever shot they are shooting.
And just to be clear, what you just described was what you are accustomed to.
That is correct.
Can you explain to the jury how that procedure worked on the set of Rust?
A lot of times when I would notice our armorer hand the guns over to the actors, sometimes checking them, sometimes not. Generally, once the scene is over, you would remove the weapon. The armorer would remove the weapon from the actor and re-secure it until it is needed again. On Rust, that did not happen a good majority of the time. The actor still remained in possession of the weapon, whether it was in their holster or in their hands.
And can you kind of explain to the jurors how long the actors would be left with the weapons in their possession after the scene, and maybe discuss a little bit about how long it takes to do a turnaround?
Okay, there were a few times where they would have the weapon for a minute or two or so after we had cut, but then there would be other times where we would be turning around, and that's where the camera position changes. Like if we're looking at somebody and we turn around, then we're going to look the other direction at the actor. That can take, depending on all the moving parts, 20, 30 minutes, where they would still be in possession of the weapon.
And I just want to be clear, did you testify that you saw Ms. Gutierrez provide actors with weapons without conducting a safety check?
That is correct.
Did you ever have an occasion to notice whether or not any of the actors on the set of the movie did their own safety checks?
There were some times that the actors would open their weapons and look, see either while it was being reloaded or not, opening it up and looking at it. And generally on a film set, you would not do that without the armorer present in front of you. And if you did, then the armorer would need to be called back to recheck that weapon in front of you.
So when the actors would do their own safety checks, was Ms. Gutierrez participating in that?
Sometimes she was near, sometimes she wasn't. I don't recall exactly all the time. I didn't notice a lot, but there were some times where she could have been close by or not, but she was not directly in front of the actor.
Okay.
And it wasn't every actor. It was, just a couple here and there. Just Halyna's son. And all I could think about is how I could not save his mother's life and how he was going to grow up without a mother. And how her spouse lost the love of his life.
I did not expect this testimony. I did not expect this testimony.
So I'm actually going to point those out to you. On the hammer, these kind of jagged edges, the first one is the quarter cock notch. So as you're cocking the hammer, you hear that first click. That is the sear portion of the trigger, which is now broken, locking into that little recess. Your second click is the half cock notch, so that's that second jagged edge. And then your last click is the actual sear notch. So that's where the trigger is sitting when the hammer is in its fully cocked position. So when I struck the hammer with the mallet, it actually broke off that piece of the trigger that was sitting up against the hammer there.
And is there anything unusual to you in this photo about the full cock notch on the hammer?
So again, this notch here is the full cock notch. So you may notice when looking at this that this notch appears much flatter when you compare it to the other two notches. So it could be that a small portion of this surface was also damaged during the testing. But in addition to that, there are times where the sear notch is just not as pronounced as the other two notches. So I didn't observe any damage myself in this particular area, but it's possible that that area was damaged as well.
And based on your testing, did you form an opinion about whether or not this gun could be fired without the handler pulling the trigger?
So again, the only two times that occurred was with the hammer at rest on a loaded chamber, and the second time I attributed this to the breakage of internal components. So again, if these parts had not broken, I would expect that the trigger should have been caught by either the quarter or the half cock notch as the hammer was coming forward. So I would not expect this to occur had this breakage not happened. They almost appear to be crosshatch. Again, there's more parallel lines on the left here. That's an impression that this cartridge case has picked up from the breech face of the firearm.
Did you compare this casing with anything else, any other casings?
This was the only fired cartridge case that was submitted, but I did compare it to those known specimens that I collected from the revolver that was submitted.
And the known specimens, are those the ones that you fired out of the revolver yourself?
That's correct. That's the secondary evidence that I spoke about earlier. So I created that evidence in the lab by physically test firing the gun, and they became my knowns at that point.
Did you form an opinion about whether or not this cartridge casing was fired from the gun that we saw in the earlier exhibits?
Yes, it's my opinion that I identified this cartridge case as having been fired by the revolver.
The firing pin would be resting right against it. So this is an unsafe carry position if it were a loaded gun. It would also be the position if I had just fired it. There would be a spent cartridge. The firing pin would be deep into the primer of that cartridge. You can also see that the trigger is back. Now when I pull it, there. That's the safety position. Very little movement, but the hammer is now about 1/8 of an inch rearward. The trigger has just popped forward, so it's got an internal spring that is reset it. Cylinder is still locked up, cannot rotate. Now when I pull it to the load position, you may have seen the cylinder rotate already. It's free to rotate now. The little latch that I mentioned, which we can't see, has been pulled down by that motion. There's a loading gate here on the side that's opened, and this is where I would either remove fired cartridges or place live cartridges up to a total of 6. After loading it, fully loading it, I close that gate. And I have two choices. If I'm ready to shoot, I'm going to cock it. And if I've decided what I'm going to shoot at is to be shot at, pull the trigger. Hammer falls off of a ledge, a little notch. Actually, it's more of a step on the hammer. So now we're back to where we were a moment ago. If I'm going to fire it again, pull it all the way back. Hammer stays in position, which we saw in the photographs, which again is important because when we get to the damage that occurred with the gun, the hammer won't stay there. If I'm going to let it down, if I'm going to render this gun safe, I decide I'm not going to shoot. I do have to pull the trigger, but I get my thumb firmly on this spur. Pull the trigger, let it down. Once I get past the halfway point, I can let go of the trigger and it engages the safety notch again. So there's all the steps. It's called a single action. Probably heard that term a couple of times because pulling the trigger accomplishes one single thing. It fires the gun.
In terms of, in terms of that loading gate and the loading of the gun, if you were to show me the primers and the head stamps of the rounds that you have in the gun, and we know that there are none, but we're just going to play pretend. Show me how you would show me what's in that gun.
Well, I bring it up, no one downrange.
Here, maybe we go this way so that
I bring the hammer to half cock.
Okay.
We want to show the jury.
Let's go over here. So they can see behind us. There we go.
She used a term, an industry term, the head stamp. It's what's written on the cartridge, and in the middle of which is a primer. So if she wanted to see, or any of you wanted to see, are there fired cartridges in here? Live cartridges, all 6? I just rotate the cylinder. And we go a couple of times around, see if there are any empty chambers or fired cartridges or live rounds. If we wanted to take them out, if they're live, you just dump them out. If they're fired, you need this ejection rod here to knock a spent cartridge out because it's expanded.
So if you were to show me the rounds that you have in the gun in this manner, I can only see the head stamp and primer of one cartridge at a time.
That's right. In this view from behind the gun with the gate open.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Can I take my seat?
Yes.
Okay,
We have rounds here.
okay, now, so, this is the one, I'm pretty sure, that's the one, and okay, sorry.
You're okay.
Sorry.
Just relax. Just relax.
So scared.
No, you're all right. Just relax.
So here's the box that I got them out of.
Okay. Leave them right there. Leave them right there, okay? Relax. I just need you.
We saw you take something. What did you take?
They were 2 white boxes of rounds that the prop person, Hannah, said that these were the rounds used.
And this person that you took those rounds from, the person that's right here in the center of the video screen, is that Ms. Gutierrez?
Yes, it is.
Do you see Ms. Gutierrez sitting in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Can you just go ahead and point her out and tell us what she's wearing for the record?
She's wearing a gray jacket and a white top.